talking to Howie Gershberg, who's the pitching coach for the Erie SeaWolves, and he's been a pitching coach in the Angels organization for how many years, Howie?
This is my 15th year.
His 15th year, so he's seen a lot of arms come through this system. And what we're going to do in this interview is two parts. We're going to, of course, talk about Howie's career in baseball, and then in the second half, however, what I'd like to do is talk about this outstanding pitching staff that you have here in Erie right now. So let's, first of all, give people a little bit of your background. First of all, your career as a professional ball player.
Well, my career as a professional ball player was very short-lived. I played 2 years, one with the Brooklyn Dodgers and 1 year with the New York Giants. So you can see how far back I go. Then I had to make a decision whether I would continue with my schooling or whether I was going to stay in this game. And looking at the stats and the way things were progressing, I figured that I'd be better off going back to college. So I went to college and got a degree in physical education and then got a teaching job and worked as a teacher for 35 years.
Where were you teaching at?
I taught at a high school in Long Island called East Islip High School.
And what were you teaching, phys ed?
Yes. I was a physical education teacher, and I taught on a high school level, and I retired when I was 55, and now I've been with the Angels on a full-time, full club basis for the last 8 years.
Well, I know as a high school coach, a lot of times those coaches double as teachers. Did you have to teach any classes other than the sports?
Oh, no doubt about it. I had a full load of teaching, and then I had the baseball team after school.
Okay, so tell us, what did you teach? Biology, chemistry, math?
I taught physical education. I was actually a phys ed teacher.
So that's all I take. My high school, the baseball coaches taught physics and chemistry and biology, and I got a C in chemistry, so that'll tell you the type of quality of teaching I got. Well, let's talk about your career then with the Angels. How did you wind up with the Angels organization?
Well, I was at St. John's University, and I've had some decent pitching staffs there, and we've gone to the College World Series a couple of times, and at that time, Larry Hines and Al Goldis were working with the Angels, and they called me and asked me if I'd be interested in taking the Salem team, which is the Northwest League team, which is a short season A, because they knew I was tied up as a teacher, and they said that I can come in June and go back and actually at the beginning of September, so it wouldn't cut into my teaching schedule. And what I did was I decided to take a chance and see what it was like, and after that year I loved it. I was blessed with a great pitching staff, and one of them being Chuck Finley. And I spoke to Billy Bavasi, who then took over for Larry Hines, and Joe Coleman, who was the roving instructor at that time, and I told them that I have to make a decision whether to go back to St. John's or stay with the Angels, and they were very positive as far as me being with the Angels, and the commitment they made to me was outstanding, so I took them up on it, and it's been 15 years.
Well, you brought up Chuck Finley's name, and he's someone I like to point out to these youngsters who are down in A-ball and thinking that the majors is just a distant possibility. Maybe not a lot of people know this, but when Chuck Finley first came up to the majors in 1986, late in the year, Angels were in a pennant drive, and he was called up from low A. He was a Quad City at the time. So it can hit, lightning can strike at any time.
Actually, Chuck played a half season at Salem and then played 11 days in Quad Cities before he was called up to the Angels. So he went real quick. And we had a kid by the name of Frank Michael at that time who also got called up quick. So these young pitchers just kind of concentrate and show consistency. They can be called up at any time.
Now, having dealt with the kids and my own personal observations, there are some folks, such as, for example, Mike Colangelo, who you had earlier this year, extremely disciplined and focused and goal-oriented. And then there are other players who are here that, they just say, well, I'm here for the scholarship money, I'll take the ride as far as it goes. How involved do you get with these kids psychologically? Do you pretty much leave it in their hands in terms of it's up to them to discipline themselves, to become major league ball players, or do you just take a hands-off approach and just say, hey, it's up to you?
Well, it depends on the individual. In most cases, to be perfectly honest with you, nobody's ever gotten a ball player to the big leagues but themselves. I mean, it's their talent, it's their ability, it's their concentration, it's their work habits that get them there. As a coach, what you try to do is you try to make them understand that, and try not to overcoach, and try not to be the type of person that relies on you as a crutch. And once they get the idea of that's what it's going to take, then they're on their own program as far as goals go, and as far as how hard they're going to work and what they're going to try to achieve. I don't think that you as a coach can actually baby a kid or constantly feed him with information that's going to get him to the big leagues. What you basically do is you help him understand himself, you help him try to learn how to make his own adjustments, how to be his own self, and then let things come from there. And I think some of the problems with coaching is that sometimes coaches overcoach and then confuse the pitcher sometimes, and I think the most important thing being a coach is a positive approach with the pitchers themselves and an understanding that you're there to help them if they need you, not to force yourself on them and try to be negative with them.
Now, one thing I see discussed a lot in the fan areas on the internet, organizational philosophies with how to handle pitchers at a young age, especially the early 20s. A couple of organizations seem to have taken the approach now that they're going to limit the amount of innings that a young pitcher is going to throw, that he's not going to try to stretch it out to 8 or 9 innings, or he's going to be limited to 75 or 80 pitch count. I've seen, for example, the Oakland affiliates in the Cal League earlier in the year that a starting pitcher gets pulled after 3 or 4 innings. The Angels seem to take a different approach where you want to develop a young starter to be a major league starter, which means he has to be used to going 9 innings every 5 days. What's your take on that, pluses and minuses of those two different attitudes?
Well, I'm in agreement with what Marcel and Mike Couché are trying to do as far as having pitchers go 9 innings. There are two pluses to that. Number one, when you develop an arm, you're developing an arm to do something. If you develop an arm to pitch 4, 5, 6 innings, that arm is going to be developed just for 6 or 5 innings. If you're developing an arm to go 8 and 9 innings, that arm is going to develop to that way. Plus the fact too that pitching is a situation where if you go out there in that 8th inning, in that 7th inning, and you might be, or even in the 9th inning, you might be a little tired, you learn how to pitch. Instead of just going out there and just throwing the ball, you've got to concentrate and you've got to learn how to pitch a little bit. And to me, that's an important part of development, is that when a pitcher goes out there and he's a little tired, or he goes out there a day where he doesn't have his good stuff, and yet will find a way to compete and find a way to win, that is a tremendous attribute for a pitcher to have. So I'm in agreement with letting pitchers go as far as the game will take them. But as a pitching coach, you also have to realize there are times that if the pitcher can't make an adjustment and he's struggling, or if he's coming up in his zone because he's trying to use more body and not staying within himself and letting his arm work, well, that's the time you take him out of a ball game. But just to sit back and say, well, after 100 pitches he's through, I don't agree with that, because I think a pitcher has to learn how to pitch when he's a little tired, but as long as he's staying within himself and as long as he's within his game plan and he's making a commitment to the pitches he throws, he can throw 135 pitches. So, and this is a philosophy that we have, that Marcel Latchman, who to me is one of the better pitching coaches in this game, and Mike Couché, who does a great job as our roving instructor, and these guys installed this upon our guys. So I'm in agreement with that.
Let's talk in closing about the marvelous pitching staff you have here. And I think those folks who follow the minor league system in general know that we have 5 great starters here, 5 potential major league prospects, and Seth Atherton, Nat Wise, Brian Cooper, Ramon Ortiz is pitching today, and Mark Carragher. And yet, as we've seen the last 2 weeks, you've got a couple more now, Matt Beaumont and Cody Salter, who did what he did last night, shut out for 8 innings. So maybe you're going to have to go to a 7-man starting rotation now. But let's talk about these guys. And I guess the first question I want to ask you is, was it intentional to sort of create this pitching bubble within the Angels organization, to have all this talent together in one place so you could work with them, or is that strictly just a coincidence?
Well, that's something you might ask Jeff Parker. I was told when I was coming here that I would have a good pitching staff and that they were going to send me some good young prospects, and that's exactly what they did. What the reason is, I don't know. I'm sure Jeff Parker will probably answer that when you speak to him, but it's a pleasure to have a pitching staff like this. What a lot of people don't realize, that not only do you have these young prospects, but you've got a mixture of some of the old veterans here, like Steve Mintz and Jeff Etzel and Troutman, that have been around and that are a tremendous influence on these young kids, and they're steady pitchers, guys that know how to pitch, and some of these young kids watch these guys and learn from them, because I think that people learn from one another, especially ball players. A ball player can help a ball player a lot more than a lot of people think. And these young kids being around these guys are influenced by some of the things these guys do, and it's a great mixture. So what they did here was not only send good young prospects, which is great, there's no doubt about it, but they've also sent some veteran players here to help make these prospects better. Because I really feel that your, what I call your supporting cast, really makes your team. I mean, every team is going to have good prospects, but if you don't have a good supporting cast, it's not going to work. But they sent a good supporting cast here, which has really, really helped this ball club.
Let me throw out the names of the five, and then we'll conclude the interview. And just very briefly tell me where they stand right now, what they need to work on that will push them on to the next level, and where you see them making to the major leagues if they continue to progress. I'll start with today's pitcher, Ramon Ortiz.
Well, I mean, there's no doubt that all five of these guys can pitch in the big leagues eventually. Ramon Ortiz is probably one of the hotter throwers we have in the organization. His fastball is 93 to 94. He'll top out 95. He's got a good changeup. The thing with Ramon is he's young. He needs pitching experience. He needs game experience. And when he gains that, he's going to be a solid major league pitcher. Pitching tomorrow is Seth Etherton, and Etherton is in the same situation. He needs game experience. He's made a good adjustment on his delivery, where he's creating a better angle and pitching down better. It's created a much better tilt on his palm ball. And again, no doubt in my mind, once he gets game experience and makes the adjustment, he'll pitch in the big leagues. Then you get Brian Cooper, who's been outstanding here. He's been pitching tremendous. He's come off a tremendous winter ball season in that Maryland Fall League where he was voted the pitcher of the year, and he's carried it right over to this level. And he's a hard worker, and his stuff is outstanding. And to me, again, it's just a matter of him getting some mound experience against the better hitters, and he can pitch in the big leagues also. And you've got Harriger. He's got a great arm. He's also a power type of guy. Right now, unfortunately, he's got a little problem with his elbow, but he'll be back in a couple of days, and then we'll get him back into a throwing program. But again, another guy that's very, very capable of pitching in the big leagues. And Matt Wise is 6-2 here. He's shown that he can compete very, very well at this level. He's got a solid average fastball with a good changeup. If his curveball comes on the way it should, he can be a solid starter in the big leagues also. So every one of these kids, as far as I'm concerned, can, in the future, can pitch in the big leagues.
Just in closing, just to let you know, I've heard comments from several people now, both here and at Lake Elsinore, the feeling that the Angels are really best off having those five talented pitchers here with you because they feel you're the best pitching coach in the system. Thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you. That's a nice compliment.
Thank you, Howie. We're visiting with Howie Gershberg, the pitching coach of the Erie SeaWolves. Howie, our annual visit with the Wolves. And first of all, I want to start out by letting folks know how your physical condition is. We know you had to leave the team a little bit for last year to get some problems straightened out. So first of all, let's let everybody know how you're feeling.
Well, I'm feeling fine. I had a problem with my small intestines. They found a tumor in it. And after the operation and after the treatment I've been getting, I put on 30 pounds of the weight that I lost, and my body's getting a lot stronger. I'm back to throwing batting practice. So everything is just going perfect.
Well, I know a lot of us are envious that you actually get to put on 30 pounds, and we should all be so lucky, so consider yourself fortunate. Well, we're happy to hear that you're doing well, and hopefully many more years with the organization.
Well, thank you very much. That's my biggest concern, is that I hope my health stays, strong, so I can continue to do what I love, and this is what I really love. And I think it would be a very tough situation if I'd have to give it up and not work with these kids, because I really enjoy every one of them.
What is it that you enjoy most about doing the job that you say that you love it so much?
Well, I like the teaching part of the job. I like going down to the bullpen and talking with the pitchers and trying to make them understand what they can do to be more successful, trying to help them understand how to make their own adjustments. And actually what I'm trying to do is make them their own pitching coach. And if I can do that, then I've really accomplished my goal, because the more you teach a kid and the more he becomes his own coach, I think the better he's going to be and the quicker he's going to move as far as the upper levels go. And my job is not to do anything more than get them to the next level and hope that they can get to the big leagues and compete.
You've coached at pretty much every level within the farm system, and I think even you were up with the Angels at the end of last year.
As a player, or specifically a pitcher, progresses through the system, you mentioned that you try to make him his own pitching coach. So does somebody who plays the role of a pitching coach at AAA or in the majors, does he back off and help that pitcher more with just figuring the problem out himself, and it's less of a hands-on approach? Or is there another approach that a player is going to take when he's in the major leagues in terms of correcting any flaws?
Well, a pitcher is always going to fight his delivery. This is something that it's normal that every once in a while they get out a little sync, they start pulling off the ball, or they start jumping off the rubber. And this is the time where the pitching coach in the big leagues usually recognizes that and tries to fix it, or tries to get together with the pitcher, and the two of them try to fix the problem. And then once you get back into your rhythm and you get back into your delivery, now the most important thing is the mental aspect of pitching and how to set up hitters. Pitching is both a physical and a mental, reaction as far as pitching, as far as pitches go. And the mental doesn't work if the physical is not there. If the delivery is off, you can't spot your ball, you can't set up hitters because you're having trouble throwing strikes. So once you iron out the delivery, and once you're consistent with your delivery, now the mental aspect plays the more important part, because that's the part of where your location, your pitch selection, recognizing hitters' swings, so on and so forth, come into play. And your big league coach probably is more into that than anything else. So as a minor league coach, you try to really develop the delivery. You try to make sure that they get a sound, basic foundation of the delivery, and then the mental aspect can start getting into play. And the higher you go in baseball, even in the minor leagues, the difference between AA and AAA and the big leagues is all consistency. It's all consistency about location. It's all consistency about how to pitch.
You and I have talked a lot off recording about Brian Cooper, who's a favorite of both of us. And Brian came into spring training with a lot of expectations. I think certainly the media expected him to make the starting rotation. The Angels put a spotlight on him with a daily diary he was doing on the website. If you listen to the radio broadcast every day, they were hyping this Brian Cooper daily diary. Do you think that's a little bit of maybe where the problem is now with Coop, that it's not just the consistency, but also mentally there were so many expectations on him that he got distracted from doing what it is that he does best?
I think that might have had something to do with it, but I know Brian Cooper very well. I've had the privilege of working with him for many years, and I will think Brian Cooper will bounce back. He's too tough a competitor. He's too good a pitcher to stay in this rut that he's in right now, and I have full confidence that he will make his adjustments and he will come back. He's the type of guy that, like you said, he puts a lot of pressure on himself, and the one thing that I saw that was a little different in the big leagues last year was that he tried to do too much. He didn't trust his stuff. I mean, you got to realize what got you there and then trust your stuff. And Brian was trying to be too fine at times, and he got into a little bit of a rut. But once he starts thinking that, hey, let's forget about all this, let's go back to my basics and let's do what I done before to get me here, I think he'll come out of it, and I think he'll do a good job.
Well, speaking of Anaheim, as fans know, the front office in Anaheim went through a lot of changes over the offseason, a new general manager, new manager and coaching staff, and as we're particularly interested in today, a new director of player development in Daryl Miller. So what I'd like to talk to you about now is what have been some of the changes from a pitching perspective that the new management has brought to player development. Is there a different attitude in terms of pitch count, how often these guys work, the way they carry themselves, how they prepare for the games? What are some of the differences, and maybe what are some of the things that were good that didn't need to be changed?
Well, first of all, I think Daryl Miller and Bill Stoneman are going to be very, very good. I think that they have a very good knowledge of the game. I think both of them have a game plan which they're trying to follow, which will be good for the organization in a couple of years down the road. I think the big thing that they're concerned about is youth, getting youth moved as quick as they can. They would like to see younger players in the higher levels rather than going with the older players, the old 6-year free agents. As far as the pitching goes, I think they're going to go for more power arms. They're going to go with younger kids, trying to get a lot of high school kids that they can mold within 3 years rather than them going to college and then coming out when they're 21, getting them at 17, and by the time they're 21 years old, they know the Angel way of how to do things. I also think that they are going to do they are going to have a pitch count, and they want to protect the arms of the pitchers, and In the higher levels, they'll probably go to 110 or 120 pitches, and in the lower levels, they'll probably cut it off at 110 pitches or 100 pitches. But the idea is that they want to protect the young arms, and they want to make sure that these young pitchers stay healthy. And I think that's the philosophy they're bringing. But the little contact I've had with both of them, I'm very impressed with both of them. It seems that they know what they're doing. It seems like they have a game plan, like I said before. And if this game plan works, I think we're going to have a pretty good organization.
How much direction do you get from the front office in terms of the everyday management of your pitching staff down here? From a fan's perspective, they probably don't know. Does Daryl Miller call you up and say, I want the rotation to go this way, I want to see certain pitchers pitch? Or is that up to you and Don Wakamatsu to work out, and you get very little direction from the front office in terms of how to use these guys?
Well, no, Daryl has been very good as far as leaving us alone and letting us make the decisions as far as that goes. In every organization, your starters are generally your 5 prospects. And most organizations will set the starters for each level. And then when it comes to relief pitchers, the only guy they usually concern themselves with is the closer. And the rest of the guys you use the way you feel that you can use them. And again, it's been that philosophy with the Angels for years, and it seems like that philosophy is the same. There's no doubt about it. We're going to get an Elvin Nina, which will be here till probably tomorrow, and he'll start Tuesday because he was in extended spring, and his rotation or his pitching schedule warrants that he pitches Tuesday. So that's something that we were told to do, which I agree with 100% because I think one of the biggest problems that our pitchers are going through right now has been the weather, and the weather has really gotten them off their schedule. I remember that happening to Ramon Ortiz last year. Ramon lost his first 4 games because he wasn't in a routine. We had some rainouts. He came out of spring training. He was sick. He never really got into a routine. And once he started getting into his regular routine where he pitched, he had his day off, he did drills, then he did his pen, then he had his day off, and he pitched. Once he got into that routine, you can see the change, and then he won his last 9 straight games with something like a 1-point-something ERA. I think this will happen to a lot of the pitchers that we have here, too. But right now, the weather has not warranted us to stay within that schedule. We have, doubleheaders coming up where you have to pitch in the pen. We also have a situation where we've rained out about 4 or 5 games that we got to make up. So once the weather starts getting, nicer and it allows us to do what we can do, then I think you'll see a big improvement in most of the pitchers.
Well, you mentioned Elvin Nina, and this is probably a good point to transition into the last segment of our discussion, which is the pitching staff here, some of whom aren't quite here yet, as you mentioned with Elvin Nina. He, along with Nathan Haynes and Jeff Devannon, were acquired by the Angels in the trade last year for Omar Olivares and Randy Velarde. Baseball America, if I recall correctly, graded Nina's curveball as the best in the California League. But to be interested in your perspective, since you had a chance to see him pitch a little bit at the end of last season, to tell us more about his abilities, what you think his chances are to be a major league prospect, and what his physical condition was, what the problem was he had last year, and where he stands right now.
Well, I definitely think he's a major league prospect because of the stuff that he brings out. He throws a fastball in the low to mid 90s. His curveball is a good pitch. He has a little bite on his curveball. I think his big thing is going to be consistency. He's still a young kid that has to learn how to pitch a little bit. He has to learn how to locate his fastball a little bit better. And once he does that, I think he can go real far with this organization. He reminds me of a mini Ortiz. I mean, he's got that type of arm strength, which to me is a great compliment to give anybody. It's funny how everybody compares Ortiz to Martinez, and eventually I think they're going to be comparing pitches to Ortiz. So, that's the way the cycle runs. But Nina is a kid that's coming off an elbow problem from last year, and he seems fine. He went to big league camp, and actually doing some running, he pulled a muscle, a rib cage muscle, and that's why he wound up in extended spring. But I saw him throw about 3 bullpens before we left, and the ball was coming out of his hand real good, and it was pain-free, and I'm really looking for big things about this kid when he comes here.
Well, another pitcher who rumor has it will be joining you sometime soon probably is Ryan Cummings, and those of us who follow the organization know that this dark cloud seems to have been over Ryan's career the last couple of years, just one injury after another. What was Ryan's latest problem in spring training that held him back and extended? And can you tell us a little bit more about the kind of stuff he throws?
Well, Ryan had tendonitis in his throwing arm, and he missed quite a bit of spring training because of the tendonitis. And then when he started coming back, he started throwing the ball pretty good. Now Ryan's a good competitor. He shows an average fastball. He shows a decent breaking ball. He knows how to pitch a little bit. I think that he will be a great help to this ball club. He'll probably be here within another week or two. And with him, Nina, Morse, Bosky, and Green, I think that'll give us a really stable starting staff, and that will possibly put Pipes and Beaumont back into the bullpen, which will strengthen that also. So when these guys get here and we finally get our staff put together, I think we'll make a pretty good run at it.
Well, we'd love to talk about every one of the pitchers. We don't have the time to do that today. So let's concentrate on the other three starters you mentioned, starting with the veteran Sean Bosky, who's been in the major leagues for several years and now finds himself at age 32, if I recall correctly about that, finds himself back in Double-A. Primarily the minor leagues are about guys going up and getting to the major leagues, but here's a guy who's trying to hold on. What kind of situation is he in right now?
Well, Sean, as far as him pitching in Double-A, it really doesn't make any difference where he's pitching. He just wants to pitch, and he wants to see in his own mind, and he wants to show people whether he's capable of getting back to the big leagues. And velocity-wise, he's thrown the ball good. We've seen him hit 90 a few times. I think he's putting a lot of pressure on himself because of the situation, but I really feel that he will probably have another 3 or 4 starts, and he will make his own decision as far as what he thinks. If he feels that, hey, I still got it, I can still pitch, he'll probably stay as long as what'll happen with the organization. If he feels that the situation is that, hey, I can't get anybody out in this level, or it's not working here, maybe it's time to retire, that will be his decision. But as far as I'm concerned, I will stay with him as long as he decides what he wants to do, because he's a class individual. He's a guy that has tremendous work habits. He sets a great example for the younger kids, and it's good to have a person like him around where the younger kids can talk to him.
Another pitcher that we saw who's more of a veteran is Paul Morris, who pitched here last night, features the knuckleball. And one of the things you pointed out to me before the game, which I found rather surprising, is he actually has a decent fastball that gets up there in the high 80s. And contrasting that with another pitcher we used to have in the organization who's now with the Phillies and standing down the left field line yakking with one of his former teammates is Doug Nickel, who has a fastball in the low 90s and the knuckle curve. What I thought was an interesting contrast last night is that Morse uses the knuckleball most of the time and shows the fastball every once in a while. It's just to keep the hitters honest, whereas you have somebody like Doug who has more of an even mix. So philosophically, how is it that you tell Morse to use his other pitches other than the knuckleball?
Well, he uses his other pitches and knuckleball counts, which is very, very good. I mean, and he'll fool you. And actually, he doesn't really have to fool hitters because I've seen him actually hit 90 miles an hour with his fastball. And another pitch which is very, very successful for him is his slider. And he uses his slider when he gets behind in the count to try to throw a strike, and he does throw strikes with that pitch. So he's a guy that knows how to pitch a little bit. He holds runners well. He's really new with the knuckleball. This is only maybe his second or third year throwing it, and I think he's got a chance because his knuckleball is nasty, and he throws like 3 different speeds. He throws a slow one, a medium one, a fast one, and the minute he just gets a consistent release point where he stays over the pitch rather than sometimes dropping his arm and pushing it or getting to the side of it, once he finds that consistent release point and he can show that he can be consistent in his zone, he's another guy that I think can pitch in the big leagues.
You said he only started throwing the knuckleball a couple of years ago. Do you know why it was that he decided to add that as a pitch as opposed to trying to find a more traditional third pitch?
I think what happened was that he wasn't comfortable. He felt that he had topped out on his fastball and his other pitches, and that he needed something that's going to keep him around in baseball. And he was lucky enough to be with Charlie Huff, who worked with him, and I guess he got the feel fairly quick, and he kind of liked it a little bit. And now all of a sudden, he's a knuckleball pitcher, which I'll tell you, I've had quite a few knuckleball pitchers in my time. I've had Springer, I've seen Candiotti. and I've seen Paul, and I had Steve Sparks. And I'll be honest with you, Morse probably has the best of all the knuckleballs.
Well, I mentioned last night when I was working with Cale Beers up in the press box for a couple innings that I noticed that you have Morse in a very pronounced hesitation in his windup, which reminded me of what Steve Sparks was doing and Dennis Springer before him when they were with the Angels, and they were saying slow it down, the slower the better. Is that something that you've been adding to Morse's windup, or is that something that he brought himself?
No, we've talked about that a lot. I mean, the knuckleball moves so much that there's very little margin for error, and it's very important that he gets to that consistent release point. And the only way he's going to get that is to really control his body in a tempo which he feels that this is going to get me to my release point. He can't be too quick. He can't be too slow. He's got to find that good tempo, which is going to allow him to do that. And as he's worked in the bullpen and as he's done his drills, he's found that slow, soft tempo is his best tempo to get into his arm slot. So that's why he uses it.
Well, let's wind up sort of the other end of the pitching spectrum with young Steve Green, who I think is now about 22 years old. We had the pleasure at Lake Elsinore a year ago to see him come out of nowhere and establish himself as a definite prospect. Tell us a little bit about what kind of stuff he features right now, where he is in his stage of the career, and what do you think he needs to accomplish to make it to the major leagues?
First of all, Steve is, to me, one of our better prospects. He has an average fastball with good movement. When he throws his two-seam fastball, he has a tremendous amount of sink. He's basically a ground ball pitcher. He's perfected his changeup a lot better than what it was. He's thrown a decent changeup. I think the big thing with Steve, in order to get him to the next level, is consistency on his secondary pitches. He'll use his fastball a lot, and he'll throw strikes with his fastball, but it's going to get to a point where he's going to have to be a little bit more consistent with his secondary pitches, maybe refine his curveball a little bit and have a little more confidence in his changeup. And if he can throw all three pitches for a strike any time in a count, then he can move real quick because his stuff really warrants it.
Well, Howie, very much appreciate your time as always. Always enjoy our conversations, and hope to see you down the line, if not this year, sometime next year. Let me just wind up by asking a question. Any aspirations to be a major league pitching coach, or are you just happy doing what you're doing?
Well, what I really enjoyed last year was given the opportunity to go up there at the end of the year and being around some of the pitchers that I've had in the past and being around the big leagues. But as far as whether I would stay in the big leagues, I think that my age, I think that that has a lot to do with maybe, holding me back for that. And it doesn't bother me. I think the most important thing, like I said before, is to be able to go out there and enjoy myself working with these kids. And I've been very fortunate in the 16 years I've been with the Angels, and I can honestly and truly say that I've never had a pitcher in this organization that I really did not enjoy working with. And to me, I mean, I've made a lot of friends. I've made a lot of contacts with people in this game, and I really believe, going on 64 years old, that it kept me about 10 years younger.
Well, I'll just conclude by saying that from all the many pitchers I've met through the organization, every one of them I've talked to said they've enjoyed working with you and speak in your reverential tone. So, again, thank you very much for your time, and it's always a pleasure and wonderful insight.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure for me, too.
Thank you.
For 18 years, he's been known as the guru in the Anaheim Angels minor league system. His name is Howie Gershberg, and if you've listened to any of the Angels radio casts or telecasts, you've probably heard them talk about Howie and how he's influenced so many of the pitchers within the Angels organization over the last 2 decades. Howie, for some of the folks who haven't listened to our interviews before, let's start by giving them a real brief background on your biography and your pitching career and how you got into doing what you're doing now.
Well, basically, I signed out of high school, and I actually was signed as a shortstop. Didn't hit too well when I started with the Dodgers, and then when I got to the Giants, they decided that my future would probably be more pitching than actually playing the middle infield. And at that time, there was very, very little pitching coaches that were available to help you, so mostly everything that I had to do, I had to learn on my own. And I think that that was very, very important as far as me learning about pitching, because I had to constantly talk pitching, constantly learn what it's going to take for me to try to, learn how to pitch. And by talking to a lot of people and by trying to get into a lot of pitching people's heads. It really gave me a fairly good education, and I realized what it's going to take in order for you to learn how to pitch. So that's where my pitching background more or less came in. When I was finished with baseball, I went into teaching. I taught in a high school, then eventually wound up coaching at St. John's University. I was there for 12 years, and then in 1985, the Angels asked me if I would be interested in taking the short season team, which at that time was in Salem, and I figured I'd give it a try, and I was blessed with a bunch of great guys, Chuck Finley being one of them, and I decided that maybe this is the route to go, and the Angels kind of made a very nice commitment to me and kind of took good care of me, so I've been here ever since, and they were completely honest. They've been great, and I've gone through a lot of things in the last 18 years, but the Angels have been just magnificent. They've always taken good care of me, and they've shown nothing but class all the way.
You mentioned Chuck Finley was one of the pitchers you had your first year. Who are some of the other pitchers that fans might recognize you've touched their careers over the last 2 decades?
Well, I've been very fortunate to have a lot of guys that have pitched well and got themselves to the big leagues. I had Mike Fetters and Roberto Hernandez the following year after Chuck Finley. The guys that are at the Angels now, I've had Percival, Sean Weiss, Washburn, Mike Holtz, Brian Cooper, Matty Wise, Seth Etherton. Just thinking back, those are some of the names, but I know I'm leaving out a lot of guys like, oh, geez, you hit it right on the nose. One of the better ones, Ramon Ortiz, Scotty Lewis, Paul Swingle, Phil Leftwich. There's so many names there that sometimes Mark Holzheimer, Mark Langston, and Brian Anderson. So I've been very fortunate to be blessed with a lot of guys with talent.
Well, I think we could probably spend a whole day just telling war stories about those guys, but I think what we'll do is we'll maybe just to segue into our second segment, I want to talk a little bit about Troy Percival, because Percival, for a lot of fans and probably for a lot of the players too, is the heart and soul of the team. But I think from a teaching perspective, he's a good example because he's somebody who came into the organization. He went to school just up the freeway here at UC Riverside, my alma mater, where he was a catcher. And after the Angels drafted him, they converted him into a pitcher. And I don't know at what point in his career you got hold of him, but what was that process like, converting somebody from that type of position to pitching?
Well, I had Troy Percival in 1990 was my catcher, and most of the time he caught all my bullpens. He wasn't our starting catcher, so he spent a lot of time with me down in the bullpen. The following year, he was my closer, so I was actually his first pitching coach in professional baseball. And if you had seen Troy throw, his command was good. I mean, it wasn't pretty, it wasn't ideal, but he did throw strikes. And in a situation where a guy is throwing 95 to 98 miles an hour, throwing strikes, you don't want to monkey around too much. And it was a situation where you try to let a guy like that fail first, or something happen where you have to start making adjustments. And to be perfectly honest with you, it never happened that year in Boise. If you take a look at his stats, he saved 12 straight ball games. He averaged almost 2 strikeouts per inning, and saved every game that he was in. So it was a situation where not too much time was spent on worrying about mechanics and so on and so forth. It was more or less, here, Troy, just go out there, throw the ball, get familiar with yourself, and let it happen. And that's the way it started. And I guess everybody can see it happen.
Who made the decision to actually convert him from catching to pitching? Was it a collaborative process? Did somebody look and say, hey, he's throwing the ball back to the pitcher faster than the pitcher's throwing it to him, or was there more to it than that?
I think that there were Mike Couchet, Bob Clare, myself. I think we all knew he had a great arm, and we all felt it was worthwhile pursuing. When a guy throws like he does as a catcher, he had what we call an 80 arm, which is about as good as it comes. And rather than just release a guy like that or let a guy like that go, I mean, with an arm like that, I guess that was the next route to take, and it was a great decision. But I would have to say that it was Couchet and Bob Clare, who at that time were guys that were roving, and they saw it, and they asked me, and I agreed, and that's how it all came about.
Well, I'd like to use Percival as an opportunity to segue into our second section of our discussion, which is very popular with the people who listen to these recordings, talking about the philosophy and mechanics of pitching. And in an earlier discussion we had, you enumerated for me what you felt were the 4 elements of pitching, which were location, movement, velocity, and deception. Which one of those 4 is the most important, and how do they combine together?
Well, actually, what we were talking about was what a pitch can do. When a pitch leaves your hand, it could have location, it could have speed, it could have movement, and it can have deception. And the most important element of all that is to be able to locate your pitch. And if you can master that element of location, and then you add one other ingredient like speed and location, or movement and location, or deception and location, you've got a good pitch. But just speed alone, just movement alone that's out of the strike zone, or just deception that isn't located, are not going to be nearly as good as that pitch that is located. So the most important ingredient is to learn how to locate. And the philosophy now, what the Angels want to see, which I'm in total agreement, is that we want our pitchers, in order for them to develop to get to the big leagues, is to be able to locate their fastball. It's the pitch that they're going to have to learn how to pitch with. It's the pitch that they're going to have to show that they can constantly locate in order for them to get to the big leagues. Now, once they have mastered that location and learn how to pitch off their fastball, now the secondary pitches are the ones that they, that they concentrate on. But the main thing is that they have to concentrate on learning how to pitch with their fastball and locating it.
And a lot of the emphasis the last 2.5 years since Bill Stoneman and company came in and took over the organization has been teaching the young players the changeup, especially in the fall instructional league. Can you give us a little bit of an idea of the thinking behind that and how that fits into what you were just talking about?
Well, the changeup is a pitch that looks like a fastball if it's thrown right coming out of your hand. Now, most hitters are geared towards hitting fastballs. The higher up you go in baseball, the more hitters start recognizing the breaking ball, start recognizing the spin. Now, if you throw a changeup and you make it look like a fastball coming out of your hand, the hitter wants to hit it. But because of the speed, and he doesn't recognize the speed until the last second, you make him hit the ball and you get his timing off. Also, if you're pitching a lot with your fastball, you want to have another pitch that's a little bit off speed to get him off the fastball. So that's where your changeup becomes very, very important. Also, a changeup is a very effective pitch when you're in a fastball count. If you get into a count where a hitter's looking fastball, and now you can throw your changeup for a strike, you might get him swinging at that because him thinking it's a fastball and maybe getting him miss-hit the ball. But if he's looking for a fastball and he sees that breaking ball, he's not going to swing at it. So the breaking ball becomes more or less more effective when you want to put a guy away with 2 strikes and he's forced to swing at it. But where a changeup is that it's always looking like that fastball, so the guy is ready to hit it. And that's where you get a lot of quick outs and a lot of weak fly balls or turnovers to get ground balls, and that's why that pitch becomes very, very effective. I think that in order to be a starting pitcher in the big leagues, you have to master the changeup. There are very, very few pitchers in the big leagues that can, stay in the starting rotation, a starter that cannot throw a changeup.
And I think in this organization, the poster child for the changeup would have to be Matt Wise.
Oh, Matty has an outstanding changeup. In fact, I think that's one of the pitches that really helped him get to the big leagues. Believe it or not, one of the better changeup pitches in the big leagues also in our staff at the Angels is Ramon Ortiz. Ramon Ortiz really started learning how to pitch and really started having success when he did throw the changeup. To me, his changeup is his second best pitch. It's a better pitch than his slider. And by him using his changeup, that makes his fastball look like 100 miles an hour. So, by mastering, like I said, that pitch, it makes your fastball look a lot quicker, and it's also a pitch that is harder to recognize, so therefore you get a lot more missed-hit balls on.
Now, earlier we were talking about Percival as an example, and in Troy's case, it's been no secret the last couple of years he's had some shoulder problems and some surgery, and from time to time he's had problems with his arm dropping down from his normal slot, which flattens out the fastball. But other than that, talking about the changeup, at this stage in his career, would it be a good idea for him to start working on a changeup because of the change in direction the game is going? Or do you look and say, hey, this guy's got his shtick where he just does his one inning and let him go do what he does?
I think that's more like it. I think that he's gone more to the curveball as his secondary pitch than he has to the changeup. And a guy like Troy Percival, when you're a closer, you're more or less pitching with your fastball. And when you're throwing in the upper 90s, you're going to use your fastball 90% of the time. You're going to try to get him off the fastball with a curveball and try to freeze him with a curveball. Troy has monkeyed around with a changeup. He's monkeyed around with a split. But I think Troy's type of pitcher, the mentality he has, and which is a great mentality as far as I'm concerned, is, hey, here's my best. You try to hit it. It's me against you. And that's a closer mentality, and I think that's great. And that's why Troy Percival, to me, has been so successful all these years.
Well, I've heard rumors that he's even monkeyed around with a knuckleball in the bullpen, but that may be just information just for giggles, so we won't go there. Let's use that as a segue into our final segment, in which I want to talk about. We have so many wonderful top pitching prospects in this system, probably too many to talk about right now. I'm going to give you 5, and in the process of talking about those 5, some of them probably it's natural for them to be a starter. Others you could say, well, maybe they go one way or another. So let me give you the 5, and one at a time, just give me a quick bullet point profile on the kind of stuff they have and how you see them proceeding in their career, and maybe a comment about whether you see them ultimately as a starter or a closer, or it's yet to be determined. Let me start with the young man that Baseball America named this year a top pitching prospect. Everybody's watching him, Bobby Jenks.
Well, here's a perfect example of what we were talking about, the ability to learn how to command your fastball. Bobby Jenks has a fastball that's well above average. He's already hit 100 miles an hour with his fastball. I mean, he's blessed with a tremendous amount of arm strength and thunder coming out of that arm. But Bobby Jenks, when he struggles, his command is off. He has to learn how to command that fastball. Once he learns how to command that fastball, he could be another Roger Clemens or Schilling or into that category. But until he learns how to command that pitch and learns how to move the ball around in the strike zone, I mean, it won't happen. So as far as I'm concerned, he could be a top-notch starter, like I said, another Schilling or Clemens, and be just a power guy and be a superstar status, actually.
If I recall correctly, his other pitches, he has a curve, and I think like a lot of the young pitchers, he's working on a changeup as well.
His curveball is very good. He has, to me, arm strength shows in a curveball. I mean, he has a curveball with late bite. Again, it's a matter of commanding it. Once he learns how to command it consistently in the strike zone, he's going to go sky high. He does throw a good changeup also. I mean, he has 3 real good pitches, and the only thing that's holding him back right now is how he commands those pitches. Once he learns command of those pitches, I mean, he's up there.
The second pitcher I want to talk about is John Lackey, who, among other reasons, I think is a good argument to get rid of the DH because he was a power-hitting first baseman in the Junior College World Series. We converted him from first baseman to a full-time pitcher when we drafted him in 99, and now he's in AAA. Here we are less than 3 years later. Quick profile on John, and do you think he's one of those guys maybe who wind up going either way, starting or bullpen, or do you see him definitely as a starter?
I see John as a starter in the big leagues. He's a combination guy with a great angle. He's about 6'6", throws downhill, shows an average fastball, shows an average curveball, and working on a cut fastball to get a little bit movement to his glove hand side. Does throw a 2-seam fastball where he can change direction. Also, does use his changeup. To me, he's a starting pitcher. I think he'll be a number 3 and number 4 starter eventually in the big leagues, and that might come real soon because he's been pitching well. He's got the good mentality as far as starting goes. He has good preparation. He has good work habits. And he is strong. He can go. He can give you 7. In fact, he pitched a complete game last night. So John has shown that he's strictly a starter, in my opinion.
The third guy I want to give you is Chris Buchek, who was here at Rancho Cucamonga for part of last year. Now he's at AA Arkansas. The primary impression I came back with Booty was just that he carries himself so much as a professional. I mean, this is the kind of guy who's just polished and focused, and even though he's not in the big leagues yet, you feel like he's already a big leaguer.
Well, Chris has a lot of pitchability, what I call pitchability. He knows how to pitch. He works both sides of the plate. I mean, his game plan is there. Also, to me, a future starter in the big leagues. has a decent changeup, has a cut fastball. He throws a slider. He throws his fastball to either side of the plate. It's just a matter of him just learning hitters a little better, learning, how to recognize swings and stuff like that. And once he masters that, I can see him as a big league starter also.
Number 4 is Joe Torres, who was our first pick in the 2000 draft. And a little bit of a setback last year with some shoulder weakness problems, but it looks like, he went home during the winter and prepared himself properly. And so far, his numbers this year at Cedar Rapids, he's everything we predicted and better. I think his ERA is around 0.5 right now.
Oh, no, Joe has really made a big change this year. He came in much better shape into spring training. He's getting back to where he was when he first signed. He's just a baby. He's, 19 years old, and he's a left-hander. Kind of a Randy Johnson type of arm angle and arm action. When he figures it out, I see him as a starter in the big leagues also. He's at a level now where he, which is good for him. We're hoping that he'll have some success and get his confidence back where maybe next year come to, here or possibly repeat or even go to Double-A next year. But the big thing with Joe is he needs innings. He needs to see professional batters a lot more. And once he starts figuring that out, I think that you will see him as a big league starter also.
We talked about he's only 19 years old, so I would think one of the important things right now is to make sure that we don't accelerate him too quickly. We really don't need to because we have so much talent ahead of him, but we want to make sure we keep the pitch count down so that he doesn't flame out too early.
No, that's exactly right. He's being handled, being brought on slowly, being handled the right way. And we have a lot of time with Joe, and we're having a lot of patience with him. Sometimes rushing pitchers too quickly can really play with their head, and some of them never recover. It depends on the individual. But as far as Joe's concerned, I see what I see here is the progress he's made between this year and last year, and that's what you look for in all these pitches. Where do you see them as far as their progress goes? Have they made some adjustments? Have they made progress, or they're still staying on the same level? And this is something that we look for, and if we see the pitcher making the progress, we jump into the next level.
The last pitcher we'll talk about, and then we'll let you go, is Francisco Rodriguez, who was in this league for a couple of years as a starter. Had a great year in 2001. Last year, a lot of strikeouts, but the ERA was kind of high. And then this year he goes to Double-A as a closer, or at least he seems to be sharing that role with Charlie Thames. Why was the decision made to move Frankie to the bullpen, and do you think that's going to be a role that's going to stick?
Well, I think that will definitely stick with him. I think Frankie is got a different type of delivery. It's not a classic type of delivery. There's a lot of deception involved in the delivery. He's got a short, quick arm. Does have a decent fastball. I mean, it's coming back. Last year it was down a little bit, but now he's starting to get up into the low to mid-90 range. But his deception, the lateness of the break of the slider and the way he pitches, I think is more conducive to be a relief guy. I can see Frankie eventually in the big leagues as a setup man. I don't know whether he'll fit the closer role because the velocity isn't really quite there yet. If it does come there, then he might fit that closer role. But right now, he's quick from the stretch. He's got a quick arm and does throw a decent two-seamer where he'll get ground balls or strike out guys when you have to, and that's an ideal setup man. And that's where I think I see Frankie eventually in the big leagues as a setup man.
Now, he's had some problems in the last couple of years with injuries with the elbow and the shoulder. Do you think that being in the closer role, that those injuries are going to be less of a concern and when he's throwing 1 or 2 innings every couple of days as opposed to 7 or 8 every 5, or is it a totally different approach?
No, it really, you have to have you have to have a resilient arm to be a closer and a setup man because you might be pitching 4 days a week, whereas a starter you're only pitching 1 every 5th day. So you have to have the ability to be able to bounce back. You can't be a closer, throw today, and then wait 3 days before you come back. That to me is not a closer. The closer has to be able to come back maybe 4 days a week or more. So no, Frankie has the ability to come back, which he's shown. And as far as the arm injuries go and all that, I mean, there was some adjustments made in his mechanics, which will help that out. He had some mechanical flaws and, really locking himself out and putting a lot more pressure on his elbow by coming around the ball, direction being so far off. But now he's starting to get more into direction, and the direction to straighten out his arm path, and now he's staying behind the ball a lot, and the chances of injuries are much less when you do that.
Well, speaking of closing, we're going to close the interview out, but in parting, what I'd like to do first of all is just to give you an opportunity to reflect back on some of the kids we talked about that you worked with, many of whom are in the big leagues now, most of them with the Angels. Brian Cooper is very special to you, is with Toronto right now. And I won't give your age away because I can start to understand what it feels like as you get up there in years, but I think that one of the pleasures of what you do is that these boys keep you eternally young.
Well, I agree with that, and the two pitchers that I didn't mention, and the reason why I didn't mention them is because I didn't have it with the Angels, but the two pitchers that are very, very close to me are one guy just got 2 votes to go to the Hall of Fame, who is Frank Viola, and the next one has the second most saves in the history of baseball, and that's John Franco. And I was very, very blessed having those two kids with me when I was at St. John's, and we've become very, very close throughout our lives, and until this day, Johnny Franco and I are in constant communication with one another, working out with me during the wintertime and so on and so forth. And, you know, I get such great satisfaction seeing what they made out of themselves and what their careers were like. They weren't average pitching careers. They were great careers. And just seeing how these kids worked towards it and how they got there has been a tremendous reward for me. And like you just said, being around youngsters is the greatest thing in the world because it does keep you young. And I'm going to be 66 years old next month. And when I come here, I feel like I'm 40 years old because of being around these young kids and you know, just their reactions, the way they go about their business and all that, to me makes me think that baseball is the greatest game in the world. It's just a fun game. It's a great game. You see so many different things. You see kids grow. You see kids fall. There are times where you have to release kids, which is one of the toughest things in the world. But you take that whole package and put it together, it's one of the greatest things that person can do.
Well, amen to all of that. And if there was ever a Hall of Fame for the Angels minor league system, I think you'd be one of my first choices, Howie. So thank you very much for your time, and hopefully we'll have many more opportunities to sit down and chat in the future. I know I told you this off the microphone, but we get a lot of positive feedback from people. They really enjoy your conversations, and you help to educate the average fan about what pitching is all about.
Thank you very much, and anytime, it's a pleasure to be with you.
Thanks, Howie.